Chapter 1: Arrival. It was a stormy evening when Alex, Jane, and Mark decided to take a detour from their road trip. Rain lashed against their car windows, and the howling wind made driving treacherous. They had been on the road for hours, their fatigue palpable. Desperation led them to a remote area where they spotted a dimly lit sign that read, "The Silent Hotel." "Do you think they have any vacancies?" Jane asked, her voice tinged with hope and exhaustion. "It's worth a shot," Alex replied, turning the car towards the gravel driveway that led to the old building. The hotel stood tall, its Gothic architecture looming ominously against the dark sky. The facade was covered in ivy, and many of the windows were boarded up. As they approached, the eerie silence of the place enveloped them, and an unsettling feeling crept into their bones. Alex parked the car, and they all hurried inside to escape the downpour. The lobby was surprisingly well maintained, with antique furniture and chandeliers casting a dim glow. An old, stern-looking man stood behind the reception desk. "Welcome to the Silent Hotel," he said in a gravelly voice. "I'm Mr. Harris, the caretaker. How can I assist you?" "We need rooms for the night," Alex said. "Do you have any available?" Mr. Harris nodded. "We do. I'll need you to sign the register." As Alex signed their names, he couldn't help but notice that the register hadn't been updated in years. The last entry was from a decade ago. Strange, he thought, but he brushed it off, attributing it to the hotel's remote location. Mr. Harris handed them 3 keys. Rooms 201, 202, and 203. Dinner will be served at 7 p.m. in the dining hall. Chapter 2: The First Night. After settling into their rooms, Alex, Jane, and Mark met in the dining hall. The meal was simple but delicious, though the atmosphere remained unnervingly quiet. There were no other guests, and Mr. Harris moved about silently, his presence almost ghostly. "Something feels off about this place," Mark whispered as they ate. "I know," Jane replied. "But it's just for one night. We leave first thing in the morning." As the evening wore on, they decided to explore the hotel. The hallways were dimly lit, and the silence was oppressive. Occasionally, they heard faint whispers or footsteps, but whenever they turned to look, no one was there. In one of the corridors, they found a dusty old photo album. It contained pictures of the hotel in its heyday, filled with guests and staff. But as they flipped through the pages, they noticed something disturbing. The people in the photos seemed to be staring directly at them, their eyes following their movements. "This is too creepy," Jane said, closing the album. "Let's go back to our rooms." That night, Alex lay in bed, unable to sleep. The silence was unnerving, and he kept hearing strange noises, a distant wail, a door creaking open, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Suddenly, his door creaked open, and a chill ran down his spine. He sat up, expecting to see one of his friends, but the hallway was empty. Gathering his courage, he stepped out of his room and walked towards the source of the sound. As he approached a door at the end of the hallway, he felt an icy draft. He reached out to open it, but before he could, the door swung open on its own, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the bowels of the hotel. Chapter 3: The Descent. Unable to resist his curiosity, Alex began to descend the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of dampness and decay grew stronger. At the bottom, he found himself in a labyrinthine basement filled with old furniture, broken mirrors, and discarded items. As he explored, he noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, their meanings unknown but deeply unsettling. The whispers grew louder, and he felt as if unseen eyes were watching him. Suddenly, he heard a blood-curdling scream from above. His heart raced as he sprinted back up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Bursting into the hallway, he found Jane and Mark standing outside their rooms, their faces pale with fear. "What happened?" Alex asked, out of breath. "We heard a scream," Jane said, her voice trembling. "It came from Mr. Harris' office. They hurried to the office and found the door ajar. Inside, the room was in disarray, and Mr. Harris was nowhere to be found. On his desk lay an old journal, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. Chapter 4. The Journal. The journal belonged to Mr. Harris, and it detailed the history of the Silent Hotel. According to the entries, the hotel was built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family with a dark past. The family practiced occult rituals, and the hotel became a site for their macabre ceremonies. Many guests disappeared over the years, their souls allegedly trapped within the hotel's walls. The last entry was particularly chilling. Mr. Harris wrote about a curse that bound him to the hotel, forcing him to serve as its caretaker and protect the secrets within. He mentioned hearing voices and seeing apparitions, warning of an impending reckoning. "We need to leave," Mark said, his voice shaking. "This place is haunted." But as they turned to leave, the lights flickered, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The doors slammed shut, and the whispers turned into wails. Shadows moved on their own, and ghostly figures appeared, their faces twisted in agony. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The spirits of the hotel's victims seemed to converge upon them, their anger palpable. Desperately, they searched for a way out, but every door they tried was locked, and every corridor led them back to the same spot. In the midst of the chaos, Alex remembered the symbols in the basement. He believed they might hold the key to breaking the curse. Gathering his courage, he led Jane and Mark back down the narrow staircase. In the basement, the symbols seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Alex frantically flipped through the journal, looking for any clues. He found a passage that described a ritual to appease the spirits and lift the curse. "We need to perform this ritual," Alex said. "It's our only hope." They gathered the items mentioned in the journal: candles, a mirror, and a piece of the hotel's original foundation. As they performed the ritual, the temperature dropped further, and the spirits grew more agitated. Chanting the incantation, they felt a powerful force resisting them, but they pressed on, their voices growing louder. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the basement, and the spirits let out a final, anguished scream before dissipating into the ether. The oppressive energy lifted, and the air grew warm again. They had succeeded. Chapter 6. Escape. Exhausted but relieved, Alex, Jane, and Mark made their way back upstairs. The hotel was silent once more, but it was a peaceful silence, free from the malevolent presence that had haunted them. They gathered their belongings and headed for the exit, the front door now open. As they stepped outside, the storm had passed, and the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. They got into their car and drove away, the hotel growing smaller in the rearview mirror. None of them spoke as they left the silent hotel behind, each lost in their thoughts. They had survived a night of terror, but the experience would stay with them forever. Epilogue. Years later, a new group of travelers found themselves seeking shelter from a storm. They spotted a dimly lit sign that read, "The Silent Hotel," and decided to take a detour. The hotel stood tall, its Gothic architecture looming ominously against the dark sky. As they approached, the eerie silence of the place enveloped them, and an unsettling feeling crept into their bones. The cycle was set to begin anew, and the curse of the Silent Hotel remained unbroken. Chapter 7. The Second Night. Alex, Jane, and Mark barely spoke during their escape, the horrors of the night still fresh in their minds. Months passed, but the memory of the Silent Hotel lingered, festering like an open wound. Each experienced unexplainable phenomena in their homes, whispered voices, cold drafts, and shadowy figures at the edge of their vision. Desperate for answers, they decided to return to the hotel, believing that confronting their fear was the only way to end the torment. The journey back was filled with trepidation, but their resolve was unshakable. The hotel was just as they had left it, eerily silent and oppressive. Mr. Harris was nowhere to be seen. They hesitated at the entrance, feeling the weight of the hotel's dark history pressing down on them. "This is it," Alex said, steeling himself. "We need to finish what we started." Chapter 8: Confronting the Past. The trio ventured deeper into the hotel, exploring areas they had previously avoided. The atmosphere grew more suffocating, and the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. They retraced their steps to the basement, the symbols still etched into the walls. In a corner, they discovered a hidden door, concealed behind a rotting tapestry. It led to a narrow passageway lined with dusty portraits of the original family, their eyes following the intruders with silent malice. Jack Thompson, an investigative journalist known for his tenacity, drove through the winding roads leading to the town of Eldridge. Nestled in a valley and surrounded by dense forests, Eldridge seemed untouched by time. As he approached, the air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled in, reducing visibility to mere feet. Jack parked his car at the edge of the town square. The silence was eerie, the kind that gnaws at the edges of your sanity. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. He stepped out of his car, the sound of his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The buildings around him were quaint but abandoned. Windows were shattered, doors left ajar, and an unsettling stillness hung in the air. He pulled out his camera and started documenting the desolation. He had heard about Eldridge's sudden desertion, a mystery that piqued his curiosity. As he walked, he spotted a small diner at the corner of the square. Its neon sign flickered weakly. Jack pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. Inside, the tables were set as if waiting for customers who never arrived. A cup of coffee sat on the counter, cold and moldy. He felt a shiver run down his spine. "Hello," he called out, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer. He turned to leave but froze when he noticed a message scrolled on the mirror behind the counter. "They're watching." Chapter 2: The Investigation Begins. Jack made his way to the town's small library, hoping to find some records or clues about what happened. The library was dimly lit, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light filtering through the grimy windows. He found the town's historical records and began to leaf through them. The town's history was unremarkable until a few weeks ago. There were no signs of struggle or an exodus. It was as if the townspeople had simply vanished. But as he dug deeper, he found references to an ancient legend, stories of an entity that the locals called the Whisperer. According to the tales, the Whisperer was an ancient force that preyed on isolated communities. It thrived on silence and fear, taking people one by one until none remained. The legend spoke of sacrifices and a pact made centuries ago, a deal that was supposed to keep the Whisperer at bay. Jack's heart pounded as he read further. The last entry in the town records was a desperate note from the mayor, warning anyone who found it to leave immediately. He felt a cold presence behind him and turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Just the suffocating silence. Chapter 3: Unearthly Encounters. Determined to uncover the truth, Jack headed to the outskirts of town where an old church stood. It was said to be the epicenter of the legend. As he walked through the forest, the fog thickened and the air grew colder. He could barely see the path in front of him. Suddenly, he heard whispers. At first, they were faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind. But as he approached the church, they grew louder, more insistent. Jack's breath quickened. He reached for his flashlight and shone it around, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the fog. The church was decrepit, its steeple leaning precariously. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. The whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. He moved cautiously down the aisle, his footsteps echoing. On the altar, he found an old, leather-bound book. It was a diary belonging to the town's first pastor. The final entries were frantic, detailing the pastor's attempts to ward off the Whisperer. He spoke of rituals and sacrifices, of a malevolent force that could not be appeased. As Jack read, he felt a chill behind him. He turned slowly to see shadowy figures in the pews, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The whispers began again, louder and more chaotic. He realized with a jolt that they were speaking to him, calling his name. Jack fled the church, his heart pounding in his chest. The fog was thicker now, the whispers following him. He ran back to the town square, desperate to find his car and escape. But as he reached the square, he saw it was surrounded by shadowy figures. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices telling him to leave, to run, to hide. But there was no escape. The shadows closed in, their forms becoming more distinct. They were the townspeople, their faces twisted in silent screams. In the center of the square, a figure emerged from the fog. It was tall, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with a malevolent light. The Whisperer. Jack felt a cold hand grip his heart. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The Whisperer spoke in a voice that was not a voice, a sound that reverberated inside his skull. You have disturbed my sanctuary. Now, you will join them. Jack's vision blurred, the world around him fading to black. The last thing he heard was the whispering, now a single, coherent sentence, "Welcome to the silence." Chapter 5. The Final Note. Weeks later, a new journalist arrived in Eldridge, drawn by the same mystery that had lured Jack. He found Jack's car, his notes, and his camera. The town was still silent, still empty. But as he began his investigation, he found a new entry in the town records. It was a final note from Jack, written in a trembling hand. The Whisperer is real. If you find this, leave now. Do not look back. The silence will take you too. But it was too late. The fog rolled in, and the whispers began anew. In The Silent Town, the relentless suspense and creeping dread built to a chilling climax, leaving readers with the haunting realization that some mysteries are better left unsolved.